All right, welcome everyone. It's 6:01, so I think I'm going to call this meeting to order. Everyone can put, it's nice to see everyone's face if you're have internet that will allow that. And I call this budget meeting of the 4J School District to order. It's 6 o'clock, 6:01 on January 24th, 2022. And first of all, I want to welcome everyone. There's some new faces, and I think the first thing we're going to do is take roll call to see who's here. And I'm going to just call the names, and maybe you can say present so we can all unmute and say hi. Dakota Boulette.
Hi.
Dakota, did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Great, thank you, welcome. Joshua Burstein.
I am here. Hi, everybody.
Gary Campbell.
I'm here. Good evening.
Great. Tom DiLiberto.
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hi. Ann Fifield. Don't think Ann's here yet. Lisa, do we expect her? We don't know. Okay. Erica Thesson.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Erica. Juan Carlos Vea.
Valle.
Valle, thank you. Valle? Sorry, Juan Carlos. Thank you. Alicia Hayes.
Present.
Laurel O'Rourke.
I'm here.
Judy Newman, I'm here. Gordon Lafer.
Hi, present.
Martina Shabram.
Hi.
Maya Rabasa.
Hi.
And Mary Walston.
Hello, I'm here, and welcome to all our new members.
Great. Thank you. It looks like we have everyone but one member here, so that's great. The first item of business is to elect the leadership for this committee. And the leadership is traditionally, it's not board members, it's our community members that are on the board. Our chair and vice chair from last year are no longer on the board. So I would entertain a motion. Martina has a motion.
All right, I'm going to make one motion. I move to elect Josh Burstein as this year's chair and Juan Carlos Valle as this year's vice chair.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second.
Thanks, Dakota. So Martina has made the motion and Dakota seconded. Any discussion? Maya.
I just want to confirm, I assume this is the case, but just to make sure, I just want to confirm that Josh and Juan Carlos are actually interested in the job.
Oh, Maya, come on now, we could, yeah, great, good question. Let's hear from both of them. That would be great.
Great question, Maya. Thank you. And I will say, yes, I'm happy to do whatever helps everybody. I've been chair once or twice before, so I think I'm the longest serving of the lay people, so I'm happy to do it. And I appreciate the confidence. Thank you.
Juan Carlos?
Thank you, Maya, for the mention that we.
Great.
Thank you. I'm honored to mention that.
Great.
I
Thank
cannot hear.
Can you, do you want to, is your mic okay there, Juan Carlos?
I believe so. Any better?
Laurel? No. Do you have headphones, Juan Carlos? Maybe that would.
I will try to find them.
Right.
I'm on a side right now.
So we have the longest serving and the second longest serving budget committee members in the motion. So any other discussion? Okay, I'm going to call the question then. And I just want to note, now we have everyone here, and Fifield, welcome. Glad you could join us. We have everyone in attendance. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Looking at all the screens, and I see, and the motion is for Josh Burstein and to be the chair and Juan Carlos to be the vice chair. Thank you. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Excellent. Thank you very much. And now I get to turn the meeting over to Josh. You ready for this, Josh? You have your agenda?
Sure, yep, I do. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay, great. First, I also want to welcome all the new folks, which includes not only the, see if I get the numbers right, at least three new lay people here, right? Dakota, Erica, Tom. Am I missing someone, or is that, I think the rest of us are returning, right? And then on the board side, I'm trying to remember now, I think Maya, Laurel, at least the two of you are new on budget committee for this year, right?
Not Maya, just me.
Well, Maya, you're on before as a layperson, but now you're on as a board member. That's right. Okay, awesome. Well, it's great to be here with everybody. Thank you again for, I guess, giving me the honor to do this again. Let's hit the agenda. And I just want to make sure I have the last one. Items for action, committee administration, election of officers that we did, approval of the minutes for April 26th and May 10. We're on Roman numeral 3, 1, B, excuse me. Anyone have a motion or anything to say?
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Juan Carlos has moved, and with a loud voice too, to approve the minutes. Do I have a second anywhere? I saw Martina as a second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes from April 26 and May 10, raise your hand. I think I have everyone on my screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I wasn't here, so, and we're moving pretty fast, so I didn't get to say anything. So I don't think it's appropriate that I vote on something I wasn't here to compare the minutes to, so.
That makes sense. So that could be a abstention, I think, if that's right. So then we're 14, am I kind of right? 13 to 0 to 1, or actually, wait. Anyone else either no, actually call it, I'm sorry, all opposed? And then any abstentions, Laurel already? Okay, so I think we're 13 to 0 to 1, if I did the math right. We're 14 total, right? Someone help me. Okay, thanks. All right, moving to 3.1C, approval of the proposed budget committee meeting schedule for March through May. And I actually may ask staff to remind us of our schedule. Andrea, I think you, perfect, thank you.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? I hope.
So I'll jump in. So we're looking at, well, after today, which is January 24th, the proposed schedule is that March 28th, and these are all Mondays, I believe, at 6 p.m. if I'm not mistaken, right? Okay, 6
That's
to 8.
correct.
Okay. March 28 would be where we would review all funds budget for district operations. Then April 25th would be the presentation of the 22-23, so fiscal year superintendent's proposed budget. And then May 9 would be the approval of the budget and declaration of taxes and levies. And if I may just add another comment, what we do as a committee is I don't know if we approve it per se, but we recommend it, right? Is that the right word to use, to the board? Because the board itself has to vote, is the one who actually does approve the budget in late May or June. It has to be a certain number of days before the end of the fiscal year. Is that right?
That's correct. The board adopts the budget
Adopts
for
it.
the next fiscal year, and they must do that by June 30th so that as of July 1, we can actually pay our vendors and our people and all of that. We have to have an adopted budget to be able to make any expenditure.
So maybe as a committee, we can approve it, but it's a recommendation to the board to adopt it is what is the logistics. Okay, perfect. Any questions on these dates? I will just say from the past, I know sometimes we've had 3 meetings, and a couple of times we did hold another spot, another day, perhaps for if there was an extra meeting needed somewhere. I think one year we even did 5. Actually, if you count today, this would be a 4 meeting schedule today plus these 3. Any thoughts on that from any members? Gary, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and Anne had her hand up as well. But just since you called on me, I have May 23rd as a backup day as well. Was that on anybody else's calendar, or is that just somehow I was being proactive on my own?
Andrea, I'm going to turn to you because I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. May 23rd is actually, it is too close to the first board meeting in June. I believe the first board meeting is June 1st, for us to be able to meet all of the posting requirements for local budget law. So I think that was originally a possibility, but we would have to move that to earlier in May to allow us the amount of time we need to ensure that the proposed budget is posted in the newspaper and all of our other requirements are met before the board can do their work as starting on June 1st.
And I can't see you, but I heard your hand was up.
Yeah, March 28th isn't that the Monday of spring break, and are folks expecting to be around and available to participate in the meeting?
Good question. Is that spring break, 4J spring break, I assume you mean?
Yeah, that's the one that really I pay attention to.
Ditto.
I think that's the Monday we come back, but I'm looking right now at the calendar.
Oh,
Thanks, Sydney.
Because
it is the Monday we come back from spring break. It's the first Monday that we're back in session.
Oh, okay, very good.
Excellent. So, and is that okay then? I guess. If
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
We're back there.
Better fix my vacation plans, huh?
Well, or at least your kids.
You might have a 2-week vacation.
One thought on the dates and what Gary had mentioned about a potential other day. I guess one question I have, and I'll open this up to everyone, is if it's worth to have like an extra day put in that we don't, that's sort of penciled in, if you will. So if we have a need, that we have that available. But looking at the calendar is now, if people agree with that, it looks like it would be May 2nd, which is the Monday between April 25th and May 9th. And my thinking on that was only because once proposed budget is presented, in case there's another need for more discussion or public comment or something like that. Now that would be 3 weeks in a row, which could be a little, busy for some people's calendars, of course. I'm looking for discussion.
I would.
Laurel, go ahead. Yeah.
I think there needs to be more discussion about budget. I think it seems, from my point of view in the past, it's kind of been where recommendations come in and then the budget committee looks at them, but I haven't, as far as I understand, there isn't a lot of changes. I think we're looking at a time right now where some changes need to happen, and I would like more meetings than just these few to have these discussions with all the community that's on this committee, which is an important committee, because I think some changes need to happen. So my proposal is we definitely add February, but perhaps another one as well.
Maya, I see your hand up too. And then Alicia after Maya.
Correct me if I'm wrong. We have to approve by no later than the end of June, correct? I'm wondering if that May 9th date, instead of 3 weeks in a row, if that May 9th date might be pushed back for the approval and the extra day put in as the May 9th date. 3 weeks in a row feels like a lot of Mondays and not a lot of time to digest or ask questions or dig deep if those are things that folks want to do.
So one quick question before I turn to Alicia. You're saying to make May 9 or to push that back to May 16 maybe, and then try to add a date between April 25th and May 16?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm not sure which one, but yeah, something so that it's not 3 in a row, at
Right,
least
right,
give
Okay.
a little turnaround time.
Great. Okay, Alicia, go ahead.
Hey,
And then Juan
thanks.
Carlos after Alicia. Thanks.
Great. So I think adding a couple extra dates because we are having much more conversation about some things is a good idea. And sometimes I do feel rushed on the budget committee. One of the things that I have always talked about and I want to be clear on is what is the charge of the budget committee? Because I feel like sometimes people get frustrated with their role on the budget committee because people want it to or assume it to be different. I'm not too worried about this group getting frustrated because when we did interviews, everyone was very willing and very proficient at articulating the role of the budget committee. But sometimes when you get in there and you see things you want to change, you got to remember the board has that responsibility and what is the responsibility of the budget committee, because there's nothing more frustrating than thinking you're going to do something that you actually don't get to do. So maybe that's the first thing we would want to do. And maybe you've already got that taken care of, Andrea, where you're going to show us a slide with the responsibility and role of the budget committee. And then as a budget committee, if we choose to change that, can we? Is it in statute? Where else have they done that? I just think we have to have those conversations before we get into conversations about things that we don't have any power to change. And for me, it's about if we want to change it, how do we make it happen? So being really clear on how we would make a change happen. I hope that makes sense to all of you. Thanks.
Before I turn to Juan Carlos and then Gordon, I just want to ask if Andrea, that's part of your plan presentation about what our charge is, what our role is.
So typically in the past, we did our new budget member orientation at the beginning of this meeting, but we actually moved it to last week. And new members attended on Thursday night, where we went through the statutory role of the budget committee and what the budget committee would do throughout this time period to prepare for, in this case, it was the May 9th meeting where they would approve the proposed budget and declare taxes and levies. So it's not part of this presentation. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'll turn to Juan Carlos and then Gordon, and maybe Andrea, either if it's something that's like 2 slides from the last one, if that's that small, I can't remember. I was there and I just don't remember. Or Alicia, I know you've been on the board and obviously the budget committee for quite a while. Maybe you could give a quick sense of the charge, but let's go to others first while you two can maybe work that through. Juan Carlos and then Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Alicia really brings up a very, very good point in that the conversation needs to start somewhere. You have to remember that although it's very prescribed what we're asked to do and the types of recommendations that ultimately is approved and adopted by the actual board, the perception of the community is that we need to do more. Hence my next point, which is supportive of what Laurel said earlier. Let's make sure that we have some time. If there is no rush, like in the past, we have to meet some specific deadlines in where we have to do this because we have all this information coming in. If that's not the case this year, let us make sure we have some time to meet with groups and get feedback from the community, because that's what we're going to be recommending and passing that on right to the board. That to me, if not specific, that's what attracted me to be a part of this group, to obviously make sure that we're a conduit. In that sense, really, and my third point really is, where do we put those meetings in? Is that people have asked me, why don't you have the public feedback or the meeting with groups before, say, the presentation on April the 25th, which that will be kind of loaded into where things are going to be going. Is it possible to do it before so that we have some feedback to give to staff, or right after when people had a chance to review all the proposal? But definitely on those 3 points, I hope you consider.
Gordon, and then I see Laurel's hand up again.
Thanks. Yeah, Alicia's right that we've had this conversation many times, or several times, at least in my experience. And as I understand the law, the board is the body that has the power to actually vote to approve the budget or not approve the budget or make changes in the budget. And the budget committee is advisory to the board. But even really acting like advisory to the board would be a big change from how we've done things in my experience in the past, which has not been to do that. So, we've talked about this before. I think that, we're not trying to do every line item, but we're also not here just to say, your job is to approve, as if there's no option to not approve or to change things as a condition of approval, because then it makes no sense to have a budget advisory budget committee, or frankly, board involvement, because we're not competent to say, does the budget balance? I'm certainly not. And I think what we are supposed to do is to channel community input to thinking about the big picture decisions about, do we want to put more money into this or that? And I hope that we'll get budget information, have time to talk about those things so that part can be meaningful. Thanks.
Laurel, go ahead.
Yes, agreeing with Gordon and Juan Carlos. I just wanted to talk about the idea of what we're supposed to do is not always accurately portrayed. Really, a committee is here, like Gordon said and Juan Carlos said, is to help inform how this money is spent. And then while we can't go over everything, we want your real help in things need to change. Like, I have a personal want to change our minimum amount that we pay people to be no less than $17 at starting wages. Right now, we pay much less than that in starting wages. I want to bring that to the budget committee and have that discussion. In 4 meetings, how does that happen? Really, it's just it seems perfunctory instead of a place where we can really talk about these kind of hard issues and figure out how to bring it to the board so we can vote on it. And that is not something that they have done in the past. So it may not look like that's part of the work, but it absolutely is part of the work. It absolutely is.
I know that we're past time on the agenda, but I do see hands and some important discussions. So I saw Maya and then Tom and then Sydney. So if that's okay to go in that order, go ahead, Maya.
I'm going to go ahead and let Tom and Sydney speak since I already had a chance, and I'm hearing from Tom as a new board member.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Maya. And I would agree with Juan Carlos and Laurel and Gordon about providing a conduit. That's one of the biggest reasons that I signed up to be on this committee. And I think there's several communities that the district, and maybe more specifically the budget committee, needs to hear from and inform. This conduit goes in both directions. And in my observations, the times that I've been to the budget committee, and this goes back a long time, it usually comes in our lap, and it's quite late. The superintendent and the board starts this process really early, and they have to. There are lots of things that need to be in place. People need to envision what's going down the next year. But I'd like to propose and hear from other people their ideas on engaging on our various communities. And one of the largest and perhaps, and also one of the most marginalized, is the Spanish-speaking community. And I know we're talking about scheduling and meetings right now, and maybe this has gone sideways a little bit, but still, this is all important, and I'm glad I'm here to hear it. But I wanted to just express those thoughts before we went on. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And Sid, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's good to talk about it before we bring it forward, because I think that is a huge frustration when anticipation of making change isn't what ends up happening when we do end up preparing and showing you the budget. to make big changes that, for example, that Laurel's talking about with everyone getting paid at least $17 an hour, that would have to be bargained. So this committee couldn't decide it until we went to a bargaining, through bargaining, and I'm assuming classified as the group that would have to bargain that. So know that there are steps, and I feel like it takes us a long time to get somewhere, but this group won't be able to make unilateral decisions like that without going through other steps in the process.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, we do. You're right. We don't bargain here. I think what I want to do is I see a few hands. I see Maya and then Alicia and then Juan Carlos. And then I think I want to try to get a consensus on meetings, just to bring it back. Like Tom was saying, if we've gone a little off, whether we need to put in a couple another meeting, another 2 meetings, something like that, what the purpose would be for. People have talked about different things, and then try to get back on time with the agenda, because I think we have public comment and some other stuff coming up. But I see Maya and then Alicia, then Juan Carlos.
To follow up on what Tom was just saying about communities that have been historically excluded, and I say historically because I'm hoping that that changes starting today with a conversation like this. I'm wondering if we could, and I hope that folks who are more knowledgeable about process can inform me if this is appropriate or how we could shape this. But I'm wondering if we could create a subcommittee that includes some board members and some budget committee members to really dig deep into how to include the community, because as those of us who have come to budget committee meetings and sat all by ourselves in the audience, just by opening it up, we don't hear from even the folks who come to our regular board meetings, let alone the folks who would really enrich our budget and our district decision making. So I don't know if that calls for me to make a motion here, or if it calls for me to bring it to our board meeting. But that's what I would propose, so that we could really dig deep, not just for this year, but for future budget making, and including voices that are outside of this space.
Alicia, go ahead.
Thanks. So let's think about first, and you might appreciate this, Josh, do what you said, which is let's put some extra meetings out there on the agenda to take our time making sure we get those calendared. And then as we look at what is our charge, and if there are things like we just talked about and Laurel proposed, where do those need to sit? So maybe our next agenda is talking about those and then figuring out, who needs to have that conversation. Because that was my point, which is we do have a limited role, but if things come up and our community is speaking to us, the last thing I want to say is not my job, not my role. So how do we create that space for those of us, and particularly the community members who bring that different perspective? And that's, if you look at what the charge is, that's one of the things that the charge of a budget committee is, to make that happen, and not just talk about it again. So I guess my suggestion is let's get more meetings on the calendar, and then figure out how at the next meeting, or how we give our time and opportunity for those conversations to happen. Thanks.
Juan Carlos, and then Sydney, and then I want to try to find some way to wrap all that up together.
I'm just curious if there's a possibility for us to add April the 18th and May the 2nd as 2 meetings in between, prior getting the bulk of the info and right after. Is that something that you will consider, or do you have different dates? That will give us at least an extra 2 meetings.
The one thing, I'll just answer that one for all of us, which that would be 4 meetings in a row then, which is maybe okay. I mean, I know that there was someone had brought up earlier, and I can't remember who, I apologize, the idea of even 3 in a row. Maya, right? Okay. So just a thought, it adds more, but also, if it's a downside for some people. But so now it looks like April 18 and May 2 are some dates. And I know earlier Laurel also talked about even before March 28, I think something February. So we're kind of looking at different ideas here. Sydney, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that it feels good to have us thinking about other communities that doesn't always hear from us. And so I wondered if I could just put a little something in Judy's ear that maybe we could talk about it at the board meeting. That's all I was saying. It's just at this moment in the middle of everything, maybe we could have the conversation on the agenda at the board meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to finish up my question by just a comment, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
If we are talking about including the community, those voices that normally don't come to the ivory tower, typically because we're doing this in Zoom, I would typically say to you, don't let them come to you, go to them, approach them, because otherwise we're asking them to come to us. In this case, we're doing it by Zoom. I mean, the first kind of makes it easier and also harder. I think that if that conversation needs to happen, I'm glad the board at least will consider having it. Because at the end of the day, I understand that this committee is not gonna say, yes, we're gonna go and give everyone $17 an hour. I understand that part. But at the same time, we in fact are the conduit. If we're gonna be receiving feedback and even recommendations or suggestions from the people, then what we can do is gather all that and just pass it around on the board. There's nothing wrong with that. That is part of this process. Now remember, 4J doesn't have a lot of venues for groups and individuals to come and talk to you guys directly. So they're gonna see me or some of you and say, hey, can I tell you about something? So keep that in mind, especially those voices that already feel like they don't belong or being part of these processes, and the underrepresented communities that people might look like me might be one of them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Gordon, go ahead and let's see if we could wrap this up.
Thanks. Just a couple short things. One is I wonder if it might be useful to involve the equity committee that we just, I think, recently established in a broader and pretty inclusive format. A second thing is, I think it is, as I understand it, the role of this committee is to make recommendations to the board. So if a recommendation was to go to bargaining with a proposal for X dollars an hour minimum base wage, that could be a recommendation. A thing that I guess I would like to, I'm loath to ask more things of Andrea Bells because she already does a ton of work, and this obviously won't be tonight, but I think anything that we want to do that's significant, whether it's that or if we say we want to invest in more bus routes so that the school choice program doesn't leave out people who can't attend choice schools because they don't have transportation options. Obviously, then we have to say, what does that cost and what would you not do in order to pay for it? And in the past, we haven't really gotten information in a way that lets us make intelligent choices, or maybe I'm not intelligent enough to do it. But for me, sitting with like the 400-page budget document, I have no idea how to say what might I be willing to not do in order to do something else. And so I know this can't be done tonight, but I guess down the road, that would be a question for Andrea. If there's some version of information in between the 400-page book and all the detailed line items that would enable us to have a discussion that could come up with recommendations that are intelligent in terms of the budget framework.
Judy, I'm glad to see your hand up because I was going to ask you before I kind of tried to come up with a consensus of everything that has just been said. If there's anything you want to say as board chair, given that there's been discussion talking about what the board's role and things the board should talk about, et cetera.
Well, I definitely think bringing it to the board meeting is a great suggestion. I'm happy to do that, but I'm really glad that our budget committee is having time to express how they see this. And it seems if we can frame, well, first of all, just concretely, I think adding the two meetings into our calendar that Juan Carlos suggested is a great concrete way to start. And it seems like what I've heard from many of you when you applied for this position, which I agree with, maybe that's why I heard it, but that our budget really reflects our values and what we're trying to accomplish in the district. And this committee would be well suited. That's probably how we could approach that. So when we get a presentation, we might say equity is one of our top goals, or whatever graduation. How does the budget reflect those values that we've identified as a community. So that's one suggestion about how we could approach it. And I really did like Gordon's suggestion about using the equity committee. It might be one way to do that, that they could also help reach out to their, communities that they represent. So.
Josh?
Yeah, I'm gonna, go ahead. I think you're on the same page. I was gonna say we're 20 minutes late, and I know there is 20 minutes later for budget committee discussion. So maybe we've done that now, I'm not sure. What I'm hearing and fellow committee members tell me is the idea of adding 2 at least meetings at this point. Juan Carlos had suggested April 18 and May 2.
Josh,
Go ahead,
can
Andrea.
I
Yeah,
just
go ahead,
wanted to share
please.
one thing, just so that the committee knows, it's very important to us to support all of you, but I do need you to know that we are planning to go live on a brand new human resources payroll system April 1st. So that is, we don't have any extra staff to do that and many other things. So my suggestion to you is if you're going to add meetings, of course, we need to do that. But if you could think about maybe adding one of those meetings earlier in the process so that we can hear from you and we can hear about what's important and maybe incorporate some of that into the proposed budget. Versus, kind of taking all our work, we do all of the work for the proposed budget, and then we come and we look it over. If there's some opportunity to start some of that work that you're interested in a little earlier, maybe a February meeting.
And that's what, if I could jump in, that's what Laurel, I think, had proposed at the very beginning, and I see her hand up too, actually.
So, I'm just saying that knowing about the things you're interested in earlier helps us maybe do that work just once to get it into the proposed budget versus doing all of the work coming to the end when we're kind of crunched for time with other commitments and then trying to make changes. I just like to get together with you guys, as early as possible to make sure we're meeting your needs.
Laurel, go ahead.
Yes, so I was going to mention that it seems like we were leaving everything to the end for crunch time, and how many board meetings would be in between that? Not many. So it would be really hard to do the back and forth of what we would want to take to the board to propose. Knowing I am the board, but you know what I mean, with the board, part of the board. So I propose, yes, we need more meetings, but to not, I don't understand, maybe everybody has a really crazy February, but it's sitting wide open, just ready for us. It wants us to be in there. So perhaps we could at least get one in there, but we should have at least 2 or 3 more meetings because this discussion shows there's a lot of conversation, and leaving it all right before what I heard from Andrea is that she has to start posting at the beginning of May. Is that correct? Before the end of June or something?
So basically, we will, like I said, we're putting a brand new system in April 1. So we will be very focused on making sure that that is correctly implemented for the benefit of all. But we also need enough time to finish up the proposed budget and give it to all of you 2 weeks before we present that in a meeting. So that kind of sets us right now in getting that proposed budget out the door about the same times that we're going to be implementing this brand new system. So we want to make sure that we do a great job and that we get you a good quality product. But we also, the more we know about what the superintendent and the board and the budget committee are interested in, the better that product can be when it comes there.
So I just looked at all the Mondays. Let's keep Monday 6 days as an idea between now and May 9. And I saw, I'm just going to kind of take out of the air, but just an idea. Maybe this could become a motion if people like it. But February 21 is, a few weeks from now. It's not Valentine's Day, which is the 14th. It's not the week before February 7, which is kind of soon. So that's just one thought if we want to do one in February, depending on how that fits with staff and calendar. I haven't even checked if there's anything on the calendar.
It's
Is it a holiday?
Oh, that's President's Day, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that won't work.
28th, kind of keep it, end of the month.
28th works.
28th.
28 and the 14th of March, maybe.
So February 28th, this is great consensus for, and March 14. And let's see if that'll be 2 weeks before that one. Let me just look at is March 14th. Could someone
Yeah.
on staff just check the calendar, make sure that
It's Monday.
there's nothing?
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
see any holidays that we're aware of.
So adding, I can make, well, does someone want to make a motion? If we had those two, is there a thought of more than adding 2, 3, Laurel saying 3? Why
We
don't we?
can have May the 2nd if they don't mind and make
So
that as
that-
a motion.
Make it as
Right.
a, okay.
And then May 2nd would be three in a row, but there was a talk before Maya, I think, about moving that May 9 to 16. But Andrea, is that moving that to May 16 too late?
We can do the 16th. We just couldn't do the 23rd because we didn't quite have enough time to meet our regulatory obligations between the 23rd and the 1st.
Okay,
I'm,
So it's-
I'm gonna, hey,
yeah.
Josh, I want to interrupt here and,
sure.
That's 3 meetings we're looking at. I'd like to check with staff. It's a non-trivial amount of work to put on a meeting like this with packets and staff time. Do you have capacity to add 3 evening meetings to your workloads? And I'm not quite sure what we're gonna do at all these meetings. I think that there's the idea of identifying things that should be changed. Many of them cannot be fixed within a 3-month season we're approaching because of union contract issues, because of like federal money issues. The budgets often have a longer time span. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there was maybe one meeting where we were present ideas so that research could be done to figure out how to actually implement those ideas, as opposed to the budget committee trying to figure out how to implement those ideas. Does that make sense?
That does. Andrea or Sydney or someone who might want to speak to the first part that Ann said about 3 more meetings in terms of the
So
expectations and work.
I would say that Andrea's probably played it down what we're trying to manage over there with the new system. And she's being very gracious right now, but I also understand the desire to want to involve more. So what I was thinking before Ann said anything was that we could get the dates on the calendar, and then when we're at the board meeting and at the first equity team meeting, maybe we could figure out exactly what we need to do, because we wouldn't be able to fix everything in this budget. That is true, because we've already said we were going to spend certain monies on something, right? But for the future, we could plan for the future on some things. So maybe we just get the dates on the calendar, knowing that perhaps we'll take some away, and Andrea can work with her staff to see what they can manage. But we are moving from one system to another, and one of the competing factors would be making sure that our employees get paid. So
Yeah, that's prime importance.
that's a great one.
So Chair, what I hope if I make a motion and see if
Why, I see 2 hands up. You know what? Let's hear quickly from Gordon and Tom, and then Juan Carlos, construct your motion while we're hearing those 2 comments. How about that? Gordon and then Tom.
So quickly, I have a question to comment. My question is for Andrea, which is, I remember last year getting the information that we had this like totally convoluted financial system, and that made it hard to be able to say, well, if we want to have more buses or more special ed teachers, what might our choices be to pay for that? And that this new system, once it's up and running, was going to make it easier to do that. So my question is, will that be true at least after April 1st? And the other thing is, like, I understand that there's lots and lots of demands on staff. And like I said, Andrea, you in particular, whatever, you always seem like you're like a one-woman army doing gigantic work. But this committee is the budget committee is the place where the public is supposed to make recommendations about values and priorities. And I don't think we can say we don't have the capacity to have meetings to do that. Otherwise, it makes a farce of the whole. I'm not saying that anybody intends to, but it functionally makes a farce of the process. So I think we need to be able to have a way to have conversations, to have community input, and to have some amount of data. Obviously, there's monies, like not everything in the budget is up for grabs or movable. And so we need to know that too. There are things that are locked down and can't be changed, but there's a significant amount, I assume, that can. That's it.
Yeah, I'm fine with the extra meetings. I think that's a really good idea, but I just, maybe this is a good conversation on one of these other items, but I don't want to, we aren't marrying ourselves to the particular format or whom is invited or what group we're trying to, all those pieces, I guess, are a different discussion. Am I right?
I think in general, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea. And then-
so Gordon, answer your question. Yes, we have implemented the general ledger and the core financials part of our new system. And we do have the ability to cost items or to highlight those in the budget in what we're doing to let you know how much something costs and what it would cost to, change it or otherwise move it. We can definitely do that. And I just appreciate the board's willingness to, and the budget committee's willingness to put some of these meetings up front a little earlier when our workload isn't quite so hectic as in April, and that we can really hear from you and incorporate as much as we can into that process. So it really, we will of course make the time to, make sure that we're there for all of these, but I appreciate moving some of these up.
Thank
Juan
you.
Carlos, I sense you have a motion.
Yeah, I think I did count correctly that we're kind of tippy-toeing around 6 meetings altogether. So I make a motion to recommend to the board to hold the budget meetings the following dates: February 28th, March the 14th, March the 28th, April the 25th, May the 2nd, and May the 16th.
Just to repeat for everyone, the motion from Juan Carlos is for the budget committee to have 6 meetings. Well, after today's, so 7 total, but 6 more. February 28, March 14, March 28, April 25, May 2, and May 16. All of those are Mondays from, I assume, 6 to 8. Juan Carlos, is that
Yes.
friendly amendment? Okay. Any second?
I second.
Who was that? Sorry.
Erica.
Erica, second. Thank you. Any more discussion? I see 2 hands up, but those may have been from before. Tom and Gordon. Okay, I saw them go down. Awesome. Let's call for a vote. All in favor of Juan Carlos's motion for those 6 upcoming meetings, raise your hand. I see someone help. I don't have everyone on my screen, but I think I see a lot of hands. Hold on. Any opposed? I see 0. Any abstain? I think we're 14-0. Does anyone have objection to that or disagree? Okay. Wow. One thing, I know we spent a lot of time on this, but I think a lot of things, I think it was useful because we had a good result to figure out what we want to meet about or when we want to meet and what about. And also I realized that depending on how much public comment we have, we may catch up pretty quickly to the agenda times. So I will say one thing I think, and we may ask, and I don't know if this needs a motion or whatnot, but we may, let's find consensus on what each meeting is about. Like the ones we added February 28 and March 14 were before the ones we currently had scheduled, right? Already had scheduled. So those could be the discussion about our, I don't know how to phrase this. Some of you had phrased it probably better earlier in this meeting, but just maybe general discussion about what we as a committee are looking for. Is that a generic, vague enough way to phrase it? Maybe staff can come up with language. Okay. Let's move on to item 4. Items raised by the audience. This is public comment for audience members. I know we got one email yesterday from Sabrina Gordon. Is she on today? I don't see her.
Josh, I think Lisa has the list and she'll have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lisa, do you have a list of all the public comment? And actually,
Sabrina is here.
Sabrina, okay, that's here.
I do, Josh, and Carrie Delph will take over this part.
Awesome, because I don't have the thing I'm supposed to read. before
Yes,
that, so if
thank
Carrie
you.
can read that, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I will, I will pull that up. I don't have that in front of me. I'm sorry, Josh. But we do have 3 people who are here to speak tonight: Sabrina Gordon, Amy Page, and Dana Fleming. Briefly in synopsis, the Budget Committee hears public comment from community members. If there is somebody who has a complaint about personnel, there is a separate process that people are encouraged to use. Each speaker has up to 3 minutes. There will be a timer on the screen that will be counting down from 3 minutes. And then please wrap up and we will move on to the next speaker. We will bring in the first speaker now.
Sabrina Gordon, it's your time.
All right, thank you. Good evening, members of the 4J Budget Committee. My name is Sabrina Gordon, and I am president of Eugene Education Association, the union that represents licensed educators in both 4J and Bethel. I want to start by thanking you for the work you will be doing to consider 4J's budget. The hours that you volunteer for this task have a significant impact on the educational experience of our students. You will be presented with a lot of information to consider, both from district leadership and from other stakeholders. Taking the time to understand the input you'll receive and incorporating that into your discussions, your questions, and potential modifications to the draft budget is more critical now than it ever has been before. We are here together in a situation we've never faced. We're tasked with taking a public school system that has suffered decades of underfunding and has now been through 2 years of a global pandemic and turning it into an opportunity for the recovery and resilience that our students deserve. This will be no small feat. It's going to take new ways of thinking, creative imagining, and bold steps. Recovery and resilience will come when our students feel seen, heard, and supported. When we're able to meet them where they are, take them by the hand and heart, and help them know that we're on this journey together. This is what every educator wants to do for every student. In order to do this, we need to see 3 priorities reflected in this budget. First, increase funding for special education teachers, specialists, and assistants. The current numbers of students on their caseloads is too high. Each of these students deserves enough individual attention and quality relationships with teachers who are advocating for them to help them reach their true potential. Second, significant class size reduction. Every child in our school system has experienced the pandemic in a different way, making the already wide differences in abilities and needs even more vast. Educators can meet each student where they are and help them grow. This is in fact the job we signed up for. But there is a tipping point where too many students makes the job impossible, leaving educators feeling ineffective and students feeling let down. Now more than ever, we must focus resources on making class size manageable. And last, but by no means least important, prioritize funding for mental health supports. Our students are showing us every day how much they're hurting, some through overt behavior, others by not engaging or attending, and some who don't ever come to our attention but aren't able to get all that they deserve out of a school day because of the internal struggles they're dealing with. We must ensure that schools have enough counselors, nurses, social workers, psychologists, and other mental health providers to support this enormous need. As you work through the budget process, please keep these priorities in mind. Other goals are important, but none will be successful until caseloads, class size, and social emotional needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Carrie, who is next on the list?
Amy Page.
Next is Amy Page, and she will be followed by Dana Fleming, who will turn on her camera at the appropriate time.
Amy Page. Are you here? I don't see you on my screen. Amy?
She does not, we've tried to move her over to a panelist. Let's figure out the technical issue. In the meantime, Dana Fleming has come in as a speaker.
Awesome. Dana, go ahead. Dana, you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. Start over. If you could start over, and whoever's doing the timer could start that over too when she begins.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Dana Fleming, the Executive Director of the Eugene Education Foundation, and I'm sharing a letter on behalf of Ann Burgess, who is the chair of our Literacy Committee. Dear members of the Budget Committee, Board, and Superintendent Vandekar, thank you for your discerning work managing the diverse needs and priorities of our schools. For many years, EEF has prioritized funding for programs that support literacy in classrooms. Since 2018, EEF has invested additional funds to advance reading proficiency by third grade through our literacy initiative. Working with the district and with experts in the field of literacy, we have looked for approaches that deliver the most impact. We agree that fostering literacy is a priority. However, providing excellent curriculum and instruction in classrooms is but part of the task of promoting a culture of reading in our schools. We were shocked to learn that 4J is the only district of its size in Oregon that does not staff its elementary school libraries. We urgently ask you to correct this current failure. Students need to regularly visit their school libraries to choose their own reading material, to read for enjoyment, to learn to think critically, and to be taught to evaluate the vast amount of information with which they are presented daily. Libraries managed by knowledgeable librarians who are trained in readers advisory and media literacy offer all this and more. Libraries are also a resource to teachers by connecting them to relevant information that enhances their instruction. Studies indicate that schools staffed by qualified librarians positively impact achievement. The American Library Association reports that students in high poverty schools are twice as likely to graduate when a certified school librarian is on staff. The reality is 4J and elementary schools are lacking. A teacher charged with managing their class while visiting their school library cannot adequately acquaint students with the wealth of resources it contains. Depending on well-meaning volunteers to staff libraries only widens the inequity gap, since not all of our schools have parents or other community members who are consistently available to help. We urge you to prioritize in your budget the funds to staff every library for 6 hours a day. If staffing every library with a certified librarian is not immediately attainable, pilot certified staff in 4J's lowest performing elementary schools as well as the middle schools for 3 years. We are confident the results will encourage you to staff all school libraries with a qualified librarian. We owe it to our students and our community to foster a literate generation. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Dana. And next, I see Amy Page is now here. Hi, Amy, go ahead when you're ready. Except you're still muted.
It's like I haven't done this before, right? Sorry. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Amy Page, and I'm the district librarian in 4J. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you tonight, as I know you will all be asked to provide all sorts of funding in all different areas, and I appreciate being heard. Kind of piggybacking on what Dana said, I know she went into a lot of detail on the importance of having teacher librarians, and I would just like to talk a little bit about the equity in our district as far as library access goes. And I'm here tonight to ask that 4J provide equitable library funding at the district level for teacher librarians, ideally, and or just staff the libraries equitably and fund for library materials and books. As of now, some of our most needy student populations are without access to their school library. For example, ATA and Kelly Middle School and Kennedy Middle School have no library budget and no staffing. ATA has 0 circulating books this year. River Road, Buena Vista, Camas, and Gillum have 0 library staff. Buena Vista has circulated 0 library books, has 0 staffing and 0 library budget. It seems to be that the schools with our student populations in most need of a literacy-rich environment have libraries that are closed to them. I'm told that in Title I schools, principals are faced with staffing decisions as to where to delegate their staffing, having to choose between providing much needed individual student support for small groups and behavior support and staffing a library, and I'm sure many more positions. At schools where students' needs aren't as great, principals have the ability to staff their library. It's really an inequitable situation. And we have examples of schools that actually have staffed libraries either all day or at least so that all the students can access the library, and their circulations are in the thousands. It seems to me as though it's really inequitable just depending on where I live if my child has access to their library. I'm just asking that this committee could make it a priority to fund our libraries equitably in the district. At the district level, much like we do PE and music, consider placing a certified teacher librarian in a couple of libraries, at least providing it access so that our students can all access great books, engaging, high quality books with a well-managed collection. It was said tonight that our budget reflects our values, and I really hope that our district values literacy and the support funded in this funding by supporting the funding of our libraries for all our students. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and all the public speakers. And Carrie, thank you for handling that part. Just a quick question. Did anyone else sign up for public comment in the time that we were meeting? If so, Carrie, jump in.
Thank you. We had the 3 people who signed up in advance, which is the process now while we're meeting.
Right.
On Zoom.
Sorry, I think this is the first time I've chaired a budget committee on Zoom, so it's a little different. Although, as someone said, we've all been on this long enough, you'd think we'd remember to unmute and things like that, but nope. Me too. Okay, let's do a quick time check. We're up to Roman numeral 5 items for information, which is supposed to start 6:45, so we're about 15 minutes behind. However, like I said before, there's 20 minutes later for budget committee discussion. And so I think we'd like to hear from 1 and 2, the superintendent's message and the financial update. Hopefully not cut too much time out of that. And then, as of course, we had time to talk earlier and we have more meetings scheduled. So if it's all right with everyone, let's jump right to 5.1, superintendent's message.
Thank you, Chair Burstein. Welcome to our newest budget committee members and to all of you who've been here before. Today, Finance Director Andrea Bells will share a finance update with you tonight. And some of the key elements you'll hear about are some unknowns and some knowns. And then I'm going to go off script and say that as we go, you'll find that we have competing interests, all of them important. Everything that you heard from our guests tonight, all of them have great ideas, and it will be hard to choose which one that we decide to fund. So know that in the months ahead, you have some really big decisions to make. But until then, some of the key unknowns is that we don't know what our student enrollment will be. We've taken an estimate from what it used to be before COVID, and then what it is today. So we've had 2 years of decreasing enrollment, and then we've just made an estimate. We don't really know. We don't know the path of COVID, and we don't know the path of what our parents will choose to do. We also don't know if our contract negotiations that are coming up, it is impossible to forecast out to years 4 and 5 without knowing exactly what we'll decide with our unions. And so know that some of those estimates are without any kind of information from both the licensed and classified bargaining. Classified hasn't started yet, but we're in the middle of licensed. Other things that are changing. So we have a levy, many of you know, and right now levy money is up because it's based on property values, and Andrea will talk about it much more closely, but I think everyone knows that good teaching means that we tell you a number of times and you hear it in different ways. And then we also don't know what the PERS rate will be. So she'll talk about both of those. And PERS is the retirement system for public employees in the state of Oregon. And those fluctuate a little bit. We also don't know what it will cost, what we'll receive from the state. So state, we got less money because we had lower enrollment, and that is the case across the state for all of the districts. So they could change how they fund us. not this year, not this year, but in the years to come. So in the meantime, we're continuing our work to invest in supporting all students' needs, providing supports for the impacts of the pandemic, and continuing our equity work, providing safe and welcoming and equitable environments for our students and staff. So once again, you're going to hear all of this again, but I just wanted to let you know that we have some decisions to make. None of them will be easy. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to add days to be here tonight and volunteer for our kids. So thank you for being here. And Andrea Bells will now show you the slideshow, which would also be known as a PowerPoint.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all of you for being here tonight. I get the all the numbers. So we're going to crunch some numbers together. But as our superintendent stated, there's a lot of numbers we don't yet know. There's a lot of things that are still up in the air. So we are definitely going to be keeping an eye on those and bringing new information to you as we get it. So I'm going to share my screen here for the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see financial update. We're good. Okay. So let's see if I can, there we go. So looking into next year, as in past years, we will see the majority of our funding come from the state school fund. So that's a formula that basically combines property tax collections and funds that are allocated to us by the state of Oregon as part of the biennial budget process. So you can see here about 44% of our state school fund formula revenue comes from property taxes. The state puts in a big chunk of change there at 55%. And we have a small amount here, which is state school fund local revenue. Now, the largest amount in the local revenue happens to be the Common School Fund. The Common School Fund is associated with all of the property that gets turned into the state as unclaimed property. So for example, let's say you left a job and they owed you, $13.50 and they can't find you, so they send the check to the state of Oregon in your name. All of those amounts are deposited into a big account. They keep track of who owns those different amounts, and then they invest it, and the interest that comes off that money comes to us in the form of a common school fund payment. So about typically between $1.7 and $1.8 million tends to be our amount that we receive annually in common school fund payment. We also get a small amount from county payments related to the sale of federal timber. So that can be anywhere. We've seen as small as $125,000 or as large as sometimes $600,000. It just depends on the number of sales. But all of that comes into be the largest portion of our funding for the year, and we're estimating that at basically $184 million for next year. The next piece of funding that is significant for us is the local option levy. This levy is a maximum of $1.50 per thousand of assessed value. You can see here that we're looking at about $22.4 million for next year, about 11% of what we expect to receive. This amount has consistently grown over, well, basically since about 2014-15, as the cost of housing in this area has increased substantially over that period. Basically what happens here, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, is that as the market value of houses goes up faster than the assessed value, which is limited to a 3% growth, that means we get more and more of the $1.50 maximum levy amount. And right now we are, like I said, we're up at about 22.4 million. The final number here, we'll go into more detail on this. Other revenues, about 5.5 million. The majority of this is pass-through funds from the local education service district. It's maybe hard for me to see questions, so if folks see somebody throw a hand up, please let me know. Looking at the other funds estimate, as we mentioned, 5.5 million, you can see most of the funding here comes from our Education Service District. We currently receive half of our available funding in the form of a cash payment that comes to us to pay for basically special education services here in the district. The other half of this payment is retained at the Education Service District and is used to buy services. So placement for students in programs that the ESD provides, many other things that we purchase from them centrally. Next up is interest on investments. Anybody who's looked at the market knows that the interest rates are very, very low. But as we look forward into the next school year, we do expect to see an increase in those revenues. We're beginning to see treasuries and other investment options going up in what they will pay for us. So we're expecting to move to about $1 million in interest earnings for the next year. We also have a little bit here, as at grant administration, we are allowed to charge an indirect fee for some grants to cover the cost of managing those grants, miscellaneous school fees and activities, and reimbursements for services. Looking ahead to the 22-23 state school fund estimate, we're expecting about $100.7 million from the state. We receive our property tax payments directly. So those come directly to us from Lane County, and then we receive our state school fund payments from the Oregon Department of Education in a monthly disbursement. We get 2 months worth of payments in July and no payment in June. So that gives them time to wrap things up at the end of the year. So the largest portion of this payment is based on enrollment. How many students do we have? That enrollment is adjusted for what is called attendance. So that is how many students actually remain with us as students throughout the year. A student might come to us and, at the midpoint in the year, maybe they move to another, they move away to another district, they go somewhere. That adjusts that enrollment, average daily membership resident. That's what ADMR stands for. So it is a combination of kids and how long they are with us for their education. We also have what is called weighted ADMR. So basically, we receive extra payments to help us with certain student groups that need more assistance than might be provided through the regular funding source. So, for example, our students learning English as a second language, our ESL, for those students, we get an extra 0.5 weighting. So, we get, they count as 1.5 students so that we can ensure that we have funds to support them. If we have students with an individual education plan or IEP, we receive a double weighting for those students, but only up to 11% of our student population. As you can imagine, it's not like we just come to 11% and we say, well, no more, we've hit our quota. We receive a smaller amount than a 1.0 weighting for those students over 11%. So we receive 2 amounts here, one for the students that are weighted at 1.0 and a second for any students over the 11% that are with a smaller weighting. Basically, here in the district, we tend to run at about 14 to 14.3% of our population that would fit into this category. We also receive a 0.25 weighting for students in poverty. This is determined by the federal government. They determine how many of our students are considered in poverty per IRS rules, and then we receive this amount to help support those students. The amount we receive for the state school fund is also impacted by teacher experience. The idea here is that we have an average teacher experience across the state, and then each school district has their own average, and this is presented in number of years of experience. If a school district has an average teacher experience that is greater than the state average, it's assumed that they have more seasoned teachers who have been with them longer and are likely making more money. So you would receive a higher state school fund amount to support that. If our teacher experience is less than the state average, that reduces the amount of funding for us because it is assumed that our teachers are younger in their career and that we are not paying them as highly as we would a teacher who's been with us many years. And finally, we have the high cost disability grant. Basically, this is a grant that helps provide additional funding in the situation where we have a student whose cost to serve that student exceeds $30,000 in the year. Those additional costs are aggregated and we receive a certain a number, you might say certain pennies on the dollar. It's about 70 cents on the dollar now to help us support these students and ensure that they get everything they need. Juan Carlos, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. I know you're going through all these grants and kind of giving us an overall. They're probably going to cover this later on too, but I am going to make a huge assumption that School District 4J does value those very talented people that are bilingual, bicultural. What's the differential in where does that come from? I haven't been able to put my hand on that specific item. So it is valued, yes, it is compensated, but where is it coming from, if so?
So I think, are you referring to funding for ESL programs?
Correct. But also
Yes.
separately, ESL programs is one entity, also have special skills, and teachers that are bilingual and staff that are bilingual, bicultural.
So the amount of funds that we receive from for the state school fund for our ESL program does not in any way limit what we provide for that program. It is just one part of many funding sources. It's the state helping us, but in reality, when we budget for those programs, we budget by need. What do those students need? Need how many teachers do we need? How many classified do we need based on how many students we have for those needs? If we're talking about, you might say teachers who are bilingual or EAs or others who are serving and using their language skills in their job, those types of conversations are covered in our collective bargaining agreements. So that's where we would have that discussion and understanding of compensation related to those services. Did I get to where you were trying to go?
Yeah, and just a quick comment. I understand that that shifted to bargaining. That's unfortunate. That has to be bargaining. That doesn't show me that 4J School District values bilingual, bicultural skills. Then to a point, then you have to go and negotiate. But that's a separate conversation. Thank you.
Well, and we are required to, if it is a question of compensation, we are required to negotiate those. So it's not, it's not a choice. It is a requirement that we negotiate compensation for our contract. Yes.
Thank you.
Erica.
Yeah, I see in the student populations that are weighted and it talks about the IEP. Does that include students on 504s or only students that have IEPs?
That is just, the weighting is just related to students on IEPs. But of course, again, as I said with, ESL programs, these are just additional, this is funding, but it does not impact what we actually spend in the budget for these students or these programs. It is just one part of our funding that helps, that helps bring us dollars to do good things for kids. And Judy.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Juan Carlos's question. Does anyone know if we currently have a weighted a stipend or a weighting for bilingual staff now? I know if we changed it, it would have to be bargained.
Judy, we're bargaining it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Erica, did you have a follow-up question or? Okay, just want to make sure I caught everybody. Okay, and I know this is kind of dry, but you know, I get very excited about this stuff because I've been as I say, I've been an accountant and an auditor for many, many years, and I get excited when people understand and see what they can do with the resources that are out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about enrollment projections, but as the superintendent mentioned previously, in this environment, it is so hard to determine where, our kids coming back next year. We expected a large number of kindergarteners and first graders to come through the door in September. We thought COVID is going to be over. We are all going to be, we're all going to be standing there by the door, waiting, so excited to see those kids come through without their masks, and they're all going to come pouring in. And of course, as we know, that was not, I think that was one of the hardest things for many of our people coming into this year, was that hope not materializing. But in looking ahead, we've realized that the best thing we can do for enrollment and staffing projections is not to rock the boat. We are going to leave our staffing projections essentially where they were for this year into next year. We know that will probably mean we are overstaffed in places, but we don't think that's a bad thing. We want to make sure there are enough people in line to do everything we need to do for our kids. And we also want to give some consistency and some security to our staff. We don't want them coming in and saying, okay, am I going to have a position next year? Is mine going to be cut? So we are moving forward, and we are keeping our staffing generally where it was. We are making small adjustments for situations that we know are coming to pass, where we're seeing a school that is seeing more kids than what we expected to see. So we're making adjustments to look at current student populations and what we expect for the future. But overall, we're hoping for a stable staffing picture for the coming year. Looking at our expenditures as we go forward, something to know if you're brand new to the budget committee is that this big number right here, personnel, 84%, is very normal for 4J and for most school districts. We are a people business. We take care of little people and not so little people, and we're a lot of big people that do it. So we, the vast majority of what we spend is on people. And at 85%, that's pretty normal for a school district. I mean, you might say people are our biggest asset. Right here, you can see it, 85% of what we're doing here. What builds into that 85%? The big numbers, of course, salaries, we all like to see that, but PERS tends to be a pretty big chunk, as you can see, of our salary component. So that's something, and that, of course, is the Public Employees Retirement System. That is the retirement that we provide for all of our employees who vest. We also, of course, have insurance for our employees. We have the regular payroll taxes and fees. We have a district retirement program. That means that if our employees retire a little earlier than they might be available, then they can get their Medicare or their other services. There are programs to help them continue their insurance and other miscellaneous benefits there. It all comes together for personnel. So you can imagine that any change to compensation or to our number of staff, that is going to have a big impact on our budget because it's the biggest part of our budget. That's why, this year you may see a number here, but not knowing what we are going to ultimately negotiate for almost every year of this forecast means that the one thing I can tell you here is this number is not going to be the number we end up with. We know that because we still have a lot of information to come. And I'll talk a little bit more later on here. So you see that there's this little chunk right here, our 15%. Part of that Charter school payments. So we have 5 charter schools. I love them to death, and they are doing some great things out there. The money from the state school fund comes to us and we pass it along to our charter schools. We also, of course, have to have money for supplies, for equipment. You'll see transfers up at the top here. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about reserves. But we put money away for things like student technology or equipment we need to replace, so that when our staff and our students need something, we can go out and we can get it. And finally, purchase services. Think of all of the other things out there. You know, we're paying for the electrical, and we're paying for the water and the sewer and all those important things that people like to have at their schools. But all of those other costs. And that's basically the picture. I'm going to run through kind of a comparison. The last time that you saw a forecast was May 2021, and it was the forecast that was included with our adopted budget. So we've had some new information since then, had some changes, and I just want to highlight those in the next 2 slides. So if you go back and you take a look at that forecast, you can understand why it has changed in the last six or 7 months or so. Starting out with state school funding, when we adopted the 2021-22 budget, we were looking at funding of about, $9 billion. We really weren't looking at much going on there. So that was only 1.1% growth. And we assumed that we would hopefully go back to a more normal growth pattern for the state school fund of 6%. But we wouldn't get there until 25, 27. So we were going to have very low growth. In the end, the Oregon legislature brought us up to $9.3 billion in state school funding. So that was a 3.3%. And that gave us hope that in the next 2 bienniums, you'll notice these are a 2-year block, that's how the state budgets, that we would return to something closer to our low end of a 6% state school fund appropriation increase. So what we see there is a little bit more money in the pot to go out to school districts. Looking at enrollment, you'll see here we had high hopes for 21-22. We were hoping that those kindergartners and first graders were going to walk through the door. But as you can see, COVID rained on our parade. So we're looking at, we do expect to see an increase of students in 22-23, but we're not expecting that kind of jump. We're thinking it may take a little longer for us to get back to the level that we saw for enrollment before COVID came to visit us. So we're looking at small increases here, about 320 students, another 320, and then back once we get to 23-24, looking at more of a regular growth pattern for us, which is around 200 students a year. So this number right there, you'll see on the next page, does have an impact on how much we get from the state school fund. Looking at the PERS rate increase, so we actually saved a little more in 21-23 than we originally thought, another 0.4%. So that is helping us out. We're expecting the PERS rate to drop by 0.4% this next year, for a total decline of 3.8. But we did get some unhappy news from PERS in the form of an advisory rate increase for 2023-25. This isn't the final rate increase. This is just the, the shot over the bow of, hey, we might see an increase, but we're looking at about 3%. So for us, every 1% is about $1 million in additional spending per year. Just as a, back of the envelope kind of number. But they're saying that, yeah, they, if nothing changes, we could see a 3% increase across the board. Now, what I am really hoping is that the final rates will be based on investment returns for calendar year 2021, and we did pretty good. So I'm hoping that we will see less of an increase in this next biennium. And we will know more in November of 2022, which is when we will see that final rate for both our tier 1, tier 2, and our UPSERP members put out by PERS for the next biennium. But right now we're putting in 3% because that's what we've been, that's what they've put out there for our advisory rate. Looking at the state school fund grant, you can see that we've dropped some of our numbers here. A lot of this is, of course, related to our enrollment. Our enrollment's much lower than what we had hoped, and that is impacted with the average daily membership resident number, that enrollment combined with our attendance. We're expecting to see less funds over this time period. We start to catch up a little bit as our enrollment starts to improve here, but as it is at the, the next couple of years, we're going to see less funding. Oh, Juan, I'll pause and let you dive in. Did you have a question?
Juan Carlos, your hand is up. Maybe it's an accident.
Well, I'll keep.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Here I am.
Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So, see, I thought that the greatest enrollment, like you said, is going to happen the next year or two, but COVID came. But I'm surprised, assuming that COVID will be under control 22, 24, that the actual increase will be much significant than what you forecasted. And do you have any figures about which grades are most represented in these increases or in these enrollments?
So what we are expecting is that we will begin to see more, we'll begin to see students coming back in at the kindergarten and first grade levels. Typically we'll have some students who will come back to us who moved to let's say an online charter, or they moved to another enrollment option. We don't expect them to all come back at once. We don't think it's going to be a flood, but we do think that we're going to see folks who may have had their kindergartner enrolled in a private program, and then they're going to bring them back for first grade, or they may have been in an online program for several years. They may want to wait a bit. It depends on what what things look like, but we didn't want to assume that everybody that used to be with us was just going to come back in 1 year. So we kind of stretched that out to 2 years. And that would be 22, 23, and then a little bit into 23, 24. What helps us with our funding here is that in 23, 25, we see more state school fund monies coming to us potentially from the state. So that's where you see, even with the enrollment being less, we're seeing more, more funds, because we think they'll be more available and we will get our piece of that. And then again in 25, 26, when the next biennium starts and we see another increase. But right now, what's really impacting us for 21, 23 is, of course, we have lower enrollment and there's no increase in, on the horizon for us. We are at 9.3 for this biennium. Dakota.
Are students in our charter schools, does this apply to them as well?
So we are 5 charter schools. We do not include, the numbers, of course, in detail for our charters. We just include the amount that we pay, out to them. But what I can tell you is that the enrollment at our charters has been relatively stable through this. They have lost a few kids here and there, but not at significant numbers. A lot of people are very devoted to their, to their charter pick, and they go through a lottery to get in, so they are less likely to want to leave even temporarily, because they may lose their place in that charter and have to go re-enroll through a lottery to come back to their space. So we haven't seen a huge decline in enrollment numbers during this time. Judy.
Is the enrollment dip pretty consistent statewide, or are we dipping more than other districts? I just wonder because, you know, there's a certain amount of money, and if we, to get less of that, I would think they distribute the whole pie. So is our enrollment going down at a greater percentage than other districts?
We haven't declined. You know, we're not at the bottom, you might say. We're probably a little bit higher loss than the average, but not as bad as some. You know, so yes, we have, what you're seeing here is that had we declined at exactly the same amount as everyone else, we probably wouldn't have seen a dip as much, but we did decline slightly more than the average out there. And that's why we're seeing the drop. Maya.
So I know I'm going back a couple of screens, but just in line of a question of comparing ourselves to state average, where are we currently with the teacher experience average? Are we below, above? I know I've been on the budget committee for a short period of time, but I've seen us in both categories, and I'm assuming that we've dipped below from a lot of teachers leaving.
Yeah, we do have a younger population, you might say, who are earlier in their career right now. So we are below the state average. And that does impact as well our state school fund grant. You're correct.
Thank you. I mean, not thank you, but thank you for the information, unfortunately.
Yep. So yeah, and you're right, we have in the past at some time been above. So we've kind of gone both directions. Then we were even, and now we're a little bit below. Okay, I'm going to dive into I guess the good news from a revenue perspective, and that's the local option levy. So as we know, if anybody's been watching the housing market, you know that the cost of housing in this area is going up very significantly. I looked at the area that I've lived in for most of my life, the North Eugene region, and in my zip code, houses increased by $50,000 in 2021. I mean, I just, my jaw kind of dropped down, and I was like, wow. But what we're seeing is the impact of that here in the local option levy. So you see here in 2021-22, we thought, 19.8. We're, no housing costs, where, the market value of housing continues to rise much more swiftly than the assessed value. We'll talk a little bit more about that further on in the presentation, but as you can see, what's helping us here, we've got a decline in our state school fund, but we're getting a little help here from the local option levy. And finally, cost of living adjustment. When we wrapped things up from the forecast perspective in May, we had not had anything finalized from a COLA perspective. And now we do have a COLA for 2021-22 for the OSEA at 2%, but we are still in negotiations with EEA and have not reached an agreement yet with MAPS. So a little bit more information, but we still have a ways to go. Looking at our general fund 5-year forecast, you can see in the current year, we're looking at an operating deficit of about 8.26 million. This is planned. This is not a surprise. We were planning on spending down reserves. There are a lot of things that we wanted to accomplish and do in 21-22. So we intentionally, created a deficit so that we could spend down reserves and do things that we needed to do for folks. Going into the future, like I said, I can show you these numbers, but as we've mentioned, we do not yet have an agreement with our teachers union. We do not yet have an agreement with our classified union beyond this current year. And we don't yet have an agreement with MAPS, which is our managers, administrators, professionals, and supervisors. So we basically, these are the numbers that are status quo. You know, we don't know yet what they're actually going to end up being. It will all depend on those discussions. Gordon.
I just wanted to ask, I remember a couple slides ago that the funding from the state was significantly higher than we had projected in 2021, because I assume because the recession, everybody thought there's going to be a big recession because of COVID, which didn't happen in terms of state revenues. So given that, how is it that we still ended up with an $8 million operating deficit last year?
No, this is, that's the current year.
Okay,
So
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically the idea was that we knew, you know, we looked at our revenues, we intentionally put more expenditures into the budget with the idea that we would use our operating reserve to cover any deficit. So that was part of the adopted budget.
I may be a little slow or dense, but could you explain a little, like, what are the, so there were things that wouldn't in a normal year wouldn't have been in the operating budget that were put in to take advantage of the revenue to pay off some costs? Like what kind of things are those? And I didn't understand the second part about the operating reserves covering them. If you could dumb it down a little, that would help.
So basically there were programs, initiatives, and staffing that we wanted to add to the district, but when we projected out our revenues, they weren't sufficient to do that. But these were one-time additions that we knew we had one-time funds in the form of operating reserves to cover. And we felt that that was, you know, of course, staff and the board felt that that was a good use of these one-time funds. And the funds that you're seeing here where it says operations and PERS reserves, those are our operating reserves, a portion of which we will use to cover this deficit.
And were the one-time reserves the federal, like the COVID federal money?
Nope, this is all general fund money. This is money that is part of our operating and part of our PERS reserve, which will, if we have a 3% increase, be used to cover that increase and shield our programs from that additional cost for as long as it lasts.
I'm sorry, what made it a one-time reserve?
Well, it's one time because it does not, it doesn't reproduce. If there's savings, we have the ability to put it in reserves, but there is not a steady revenue flow into those funds to replenish them.
Thank you.
Yep. Judy.
So Andrea, I just wanted to ask, is the SIA money in here too? Is that a separate?
So anything like our ESSER funds or our SIA funds or high school success, those are all grant funds. They do not reflect in the 5-year general fund forecast. They will, however, be discussed and presented in our March 28th meeting. That's typically our other funds meeting, where we bring all of the information about the grants, capital projects, nutrition services, all of the things we do that are outside of the general fund. The general fund is our operating fund. It's where we do all of our day-to-day work, you might say. And then we have a lot of other funds that are special in their purpose. So basically they're set up to do things like pay bond principal and interest or run our nutrition services program. So this is just focusing on our general operations. Those will come later on the 28th.
And just a little bit of a follow-up to that, sort of Gordon's question, I think that's a finite amount that's been allocated for the biennium by the legislature, where we had more revenue that was in the tax collection, I think, from SIA. Is that correct?
Well, no, the operations and PERS reserves have nothing to do with ESSER, SIA, or any of those things.
Right.
They are just related to, to savings throughout the years.
Okay.
Looks like maybe Laurel next.
Yes. So what percentage of our reserves are comparable to an entire amount? When people talk about reserves, they usually talking about it in a percentage of the general fund. What is ours?
I actually have a slide coming up later in the presentation that runs that out, both historical and projected. So if you'd like to hold that question for a couple of slides, we'll be there.
Okay, and then my other question, are there reserves in other funds and other pots?
So we do have 4 other reserve funds. If you might remember earlier, you saw a line item that said transfers. We transfer funds into 4 other operating reserves. We do so to cover staff technology, student technology, curriculum adoption, because there are charges related to curriculum adoption and to continuing with curriculum that cannot be bonded and we need to make sure that when we have an adoption, we have everything we need to make that successful, of course. And then we finally have an equipment reserve. This is so that, you know, the 30-year-old truck that our electrician is driving around, when it finally dies, we can go out and get a new one. So those are the kind of, you know, general operating reserves. And I can tell you right now that the amounts that we are looking at, so the staff device reserve is basically $2 million right now. Our curriculum amount is $750,000 is available. This amount typically, it's $1 million a year, and it is typically spent during the year for the things we need for curriculum. Our student technology reserve is $6 million. So that may sound like a lot of money, but we just combined ESSER and another funding source to replace all of the laptops in middle school and high school, not only for students, but also for our staff, and a total of over $10 million. So replacing, you know, replacing student and staff technology can get very expensive very quickly. So we're building up that reserve to make sure when that becomes part of our costs, we have the money to do it. And finally, our equipment reserve is at $3.2 million.
So these are reserves. There's actual funds set for these, but these are the reserves for these.
That is correct. So these are the amounts we have in reserve to cover all of these needs for our staff and our students. We put in more money every year to make sure we can build these up and we can continue to cover those costs. And then, of course, at different periods of time when needed, we spend down from these dollars. But the idea here being that we want to ensure that our operations can continue as needed and that we do not have to borrow funds to make the purchases that our students or our staff need. For example, we used to have to borrow to buy buses. We have 1 bus lease left. I think we've got maybe another year on it. But you know, it used to be if we need to buy buses, we got to figure out how to finance that. Now, between our bonds and our reserves, we can buy the buses that we need for our routes. We can add additional buses, and we are, you know, we can do it with our own funds. So we don't charge, you might say the taxpayer doesn't have to fund those borrowing costs.
Let me just jump in. Oh, I'm sorry, Laurel.
Well, I just want to, is there a way we can get the percentage of what is already in the funds and then what the reserves are? And for, because it looks like we have pretty high reserves. So I'd just like to understand those all the way across the board. I know that can't happen right now. And I know you're going to show me more later. But I think it's when we're dealing with a year when we hear about so much need, it's really important to understand those reserves.
Yep.
And if there's place for that, I would really appreciate that, Sydney or Andrea, if that could happen.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay,
I was just going to jump in for a second on a quick time check because it's 7:50. And if I'm looking at right, you have 12 more slides. If I see 15 out of 27. So I don't want to end discussion. I wonder, Andrea, if you know what's left on the slides, if it may be something if we need to that we could start the next meeting since we have 6 more now with the rest of it, or is it sort of timely that we want to hear it tonight?
I can definitely take you down to what I think is going to be most important for all of you before the next meeting, if that would be acceptable.
Is that doable if I do? I see 2 hands up now. If we give it a minute for those 2 comments or questions, is that still doable? Okay. Gordon and Juan Carlos, I don't know who put the hand up first, and that's why I don't remember which one of you spoke last. So just go ahead, Juan Carlos. You're the first one on my screen. Of the 2.
It was actually Gordon, but
Okay.
you want to go ahead and go, Gordon?
Go ahead.
Okay. You know, when I look at these tables, I mean, big lettering, forecast. I know that you're saying this is what we expected, which is what happened the next several years. But I hope that, please correct me and help me out understanding this table better, if you don't mind, Ms. Andra. And perhaps if the way I'm reading this table, perhaps the board may want to pay attention closely about the change over time. First, if you look at the revenues, 21-22, 205.3, and then compare it to 2025-26 to 36.14. The change over time is about 15.1%. Am I reading that correctly?
That's just about right, because you've got 6% increases for each of the 2 outwards bienniums, and then a 3% for this.
Got it.
So
Let's stay on that too. Let's stay on that. Then if you look at, say, the PERS, which says operations and PERS reserves, 21-22, 53.98, 25-26, down to 35-37. In comparison to those change over time, that's 34.5%. So the reduction is much greater on that expense versus revenues. But I also see, again, I think I'm reading this table correctly, but then you put in the net surplus comparing those years. That's not going to be too bad. But still you highlight for the board where the greatest impact is going to be over the next several years. Hope I read that correctly.
Yes, and of course, you know, the revenues are going up, but in some cases, especially once we know, you know, what our full expenditures will look like, our expenditures, especially in 21-23, are likely to increase by more than 3%, more than our revenue has gone up. Now, we may be a little closer in 23-25 to, you know, a 6% increase in our biggest revenue source helps us keep up with, you know, the rising cost of doing business, another 6% in 25-26. So you see how that reflects here. We start to hopefully catch up a little bit. Our revenues catch up with our expenditures. But as I've stated, we are in a situation of we yet don't know what our personnel costs will be over this time period. So this expenditure number is going to change. And it is likely to, you know, so these numbers, while they look good right now, do not reflect what is likely to happen in the future because we don't know yet.
Okay, Gordon, go ahead.
I'll be quick. I do want to get to the general reserves thing. My question is just the closing fund balance of 5%. So is that based on the like 230 or something? So 5% is like $12 million or something like that?
Yep, usually we're running about 10 to 11. And it is the board required, you know, mandated reserve. Basically, we don't touch that. We don't include it in our operations and PERS reserve because currently board policy requires us to maintain that. But to give you an idea, at that 10 or $11 million, that wouldn't even pay payroll for a month. You know, so it's good to have a reserve, you know, set out there, but it would not even cover us for 1 month of expenditures.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Josh, would you like me to kind of skip through some of the?
Well, let me get I hate on the first meeting of this year to actually ask to go a few minutes over, but I'm gonna look at people to nod their heads or say no. I'm thinking like, you know, 5-10 more minutes after 8. I'm seeing a few nods. Okay, why don't we say this, privilege of being chair, let's say 8:10. That gives us 15 minutes for you to finish up, Andrea, and then we could, if there's any like final comments anyone need to make or agenda for next time. I appreciate everyone. We'll try to keep on time for the future, but for today, we had a robust discussion. Let's do it till 8:10. And of course, if someone needs to leave for other reasons, please feel free. Thank you all. Go ahead, Andrea.
Okay. So look at the forecast, as we mentioned before, 9.3 billion for state school fund at the state level funding. And we had a decrease in our PERS rate starting in 21-22 that definitely helped us out. So looking at that, we were looking pretty decent for 21-22 before COVID got us. Something to remember with the forecast as we go through this, that any year where an employee group does not have a contract in place, we project at what is called status quo. That means that we project regular step increases for any eligible employees who aren't at the top step and a full work year. So no furlough days or anything like that. Other than that, we do not project any other increases. We do that, to respect the negotiation process and not to, consider to be negotiating outside of that process. So I talked a little bit about compression. Basically what compression is, it is the difference between what we receive on our local option levy. So how much of that $1.50 we receive against the total that we could receive of the max of $1.50. You can see here that we had, we were not making a lot back here in 2011, 12, 13 at the peak of the recession, but we have steadily brought that gap smaller and smaller. And you will see in the next slide, this is just a little talk. You can always take a look at this. It basically says market value is what's doing this for us. As the real market value increases on houses much more than the assessed value, we see less and less compression. And right now, we're expecting to collect about $1.32 of that $1.50. You can see we steadily moved up. Looking at 22-23, we are, still at the 9.3, but we get 51% of the funding. So state school fund at the state level, first year 49%, second year 51%. They assume that costs will go up, and so that is how they mix that up. Our PERS rate will drop a little bit, and everybody currently is in status quo for 22-23. We do not have any contracts or agreements in place currently for any of our staff for this year. 23-24, that's where we see the 3 percentage point potential increase for PERS. Again, not something that's baked in right now. We'll know in November of 2022 what our actual rate is, but right now we're going with an advisory rate. And looking to 24 and 25, we are still in the situation of waiting for those numbers to have a better projection for the out years. General fund reserves. You will see right now our reserves are at their highest that they have been in recent history. So this number includes our 5% minimum fund balance. So what that tells me right here is at the end of 2021, we were at about 26.1% for our operations and PERS reserve combined. So, and then that 5% for the minimum. Something that you should think about though, is that in the last big downturn, we call it the Great Recession, we had to make adjustments that totaled over $70 million during that time frame. Had we had sufficient reserves, we would have been able to avoid cuts to staffing, cuts to programs, and other negative effects that we still feel today. So we really, at that time, we needed 70 million. We had 35. So we saw cuts and other things. So this is not, I'm not saying that this is a super great thing. What I'm saying is it's not unreasonable. We do recognize though that it is the highest that it has been in some time. And we do see in the forecast currently, the plan to spend down to where we would expect these to be. Our best practice tends to be about 15% plus the 5% minimum fund balance. So here you see in 24-25 that 20.5. That would be the direction we would expect to go. I'm gonna scan on by. So big question, why do we maintain reserves? Of course, because we want a sustainable, structurally balanced budget in periods when we do have those economic or legislative uncertainties. We don't want to ever go back to that period where we were cutting 20 or $22 million in a year out of our budget. We want to ensure that we do have reasonable reserves to make sure that doesn't happen again. We need to ensure critical services to our students and to our families. Again, making sure we have those dollars in place. One of the other things that a lot of folks don't notice, but becomes very important, especially to us when we are about to go out for a bond issuance, which we are. We are starting the process right now for our second bond issuance of the 2018 bond measure. And that involves going to one of the credit reporting agencies, Moody's, and getting a bond rating. That bond rating is going to have a big impact on what our taxpayers pay in interest on those dollars. So that has a big impact on the tax levy that you will be moving forward later in the process. And having very strong reserves has a big impact on that rating and what it costs us to borrow money. So we put this here just as saying, this reserve is going to help us as we go out to issue the money that we are going to need to finish North Eugene, to build Camas Ridge, and to do all the other things that everyone voted for when they approved the 2018 measure. Looking at future forecast impacts, of course, COVID is always in the front of our mind. When is it going to end? We thought it was going to be this year, and it came back and surprised us. We hope it's going to be next year, but we need to make sure that we are thinking about that. And even after it ends, how will we address the impacts? Because we know that once this is done, it's not done. There are many impacts to our students, to our staff, and to their families in this district that we are going to need to be thoughtful of over many years. Looking at employee compensation agreements, again, we're going to need to know what those are, so we can plan for them, we can map and make sure that we have a sustainable budget into the future. Looking at pay equity, we thought by this time we'd probably be through a lot of our processes to meet this state law. But, like everything else, we've been working very hard here to focus on our kids, on our families, on our, staff. This is the kind of thing that we keep working on, but we don't know yet where it's going to land because we're still in the process. Any actions taken by the Oregon legislature? We're about to be in the small session. This isn't the budget building session. This is the legislative session in between. It's much shorter, and it tends to be very, bill focused. We're not talking about the budget for the next 2 years. We're talking about smaller adjustments, but that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be an unfunded mandate or some other requirement that comes out of this legislative session that we need to address as a district. And that usually rolls into the budget somewhere. And finally, the final PERS rates. It's not going to impact us next year, but it will be potentially a bigger impact in the following biennium. And I'm done.
Wow, thank you.
I will.
Thank everybody. We're at 8:04. I'm going to look at the agenda, and what's next is a budget committee discussion, which I think we've had a lot of. And then under 6 is the budget committee wrap up, items raised by committee members. This, just for the new members, this is not for today probably, but what we've done with this section is if there's certain particular questions or something that may have come up in the discussion that we ask for more information on or something like that. And then agenda items for next meeting, if I could just take the privilege of being chair and saying, and I see one hand up, but well, actually, let me stop because I think Gordon's hand went up while I was talking about items raised. Let's go to Gordon for a minute. And again, let's try to end at 8:10. We have a few more minutes.
Thanks. Just quickly, one is it would be great if we could get a copy of the slides that you showed today, if that could just be emailed out. And the other is I just had a question about if there's a rainy day fund in addition to these reserves, either at the state or local level. And I don't need to know the numbers. I just had heard about that, wanted to check.
There is a state rainy day fund for education. We, of course, have no control over that or when those funds might be used, but the legislature does use them and actually did use a portion of that fund in coming to the $9.3 billion that we received in state school funds for the 2021-23 biennium. So I can actually send you, there's some great slides in the state forecast for December that talk about that. So I can go find those and get them to you.
Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about, so moving forward as we're looking at our next few meetings and thinking about, what agenda items we might have for those. Just reaching out to staff sort of earlier than later, specifically Andrea and Sid, about a type of framework that might be useful for you as we're getting ideas about what sort of impacts we'd like to have on the budget process and priorities. Like what sort of framework you'd like to see that sort of feedback coming to you as you're shaping your budget. So that way it'd be useful for you. We may have some ideas that are very broad, very vague, or may have very specific ideas, like at what level those might be useful for you. I think those might be useful for us as we're trying to have those discussions ahead of time. And we don't need those now, obviously. I'm just saying as we're looking at those meetings going forward.
On that note, I'm wondering if staff were to come up with, based on what we've talked about, I'm sort of thinking our next meeting, and I'm gonna look for nods or whatever, is sort of a just more of a big open discussion, especially since we have 6 meetings. I'm looking for guidance from my fellow committee members. Maya saying yes, Judy, Tom. But is staff able to come up with, like you did before with those 3, without well, I guess you'd want to know what we're looking for too in terms of that, and mix that with what's needed. So maybe one thing we could discuss next time is what the next few meetings would be about. So does it work? Maybe next time we have a sort of more open discussion, just kind of sit as, okay, I see a lot of head nods. Okay, let's do that. So I think the next meeting, February 28th, if I remember, will be kind of an open discussion. And one of the things maybe we can add into that is sort of to build in the meeting, the agenda for the next 5 meetings after, some of which is already in there, obviously, from what we have to do and when we have to do it. But if that would work. I'm seeing nods, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Anne, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add, I think that's great. It should be an open discussion. I like Gary's suggestion, though. Maybe it could come, we could get a framework of a way that we can have a discussion that could really inform how the budget's built. So whether it's how these priorities get, where they go into the conversation. So I saw Andrea shake her head. So I mean, it's a framework to put our ideas in. I thought that was a great suggestion.
Right. I think that's good. Let's call it open discussion and framework. I saw Anne had her hand up. Go ahead.
Andrea, you're going to do more this was just the general fund. You've got all these other funds. You had planned to do that on a specific date. Will you still do those on a specific date? And I guess, and actually, I suppose they're not the general fund. They have less flexibility than the general fund. Is that right? And so we're sort of but it does, sometimes those have specific constraints around it. And if you work within those constraints, it can give your general fund money a little bit more flexibility. I mean, this group is gonna, we're not gonna be able to control those grant funds, but we can give guidance, we can suggest preferences and give guidance on how to use the more flexible funds. So there is some wiggle room with the grant funds.
And I think that it's good to understand the parameters around all of these funds so that you understand, like you said, what is a decision?
Yeah.
And what is just, you might say, we say the math. I always say the bond principal and interest payments. There's no question, there's no decision there. We are legally obligated to make those payments. We calculate them, and that's what's reflected in the fund. So we have things like that that are very regulated and very strict. We have others where we have grants that have certain requirements, but there may be flexibility within the grant of how we meet those requirements. So, for example, there may be grants that we'll talk about like SIA, Student Investment Account, which is part of the funds we receive from the corporate activity tax. We also have the High School Success Grant that we will talk about. We'll talk, of course, about the ESSER funds. These are the federal funds that are coming to us to help us address the impacts of COVID. So at that meeting, which is typically the March 28th meeting, that's when we talk about those things. And we give you those general parameters and information about each one of those. So you understand when you see the budget, kind of what you're seeing. It's not a preview of this is what we're going to do. It's more of a, we're going to introduce this and give you some history on what we've done here and what we will be working on as part of the budget process. So that would happen at the third meeting.
Excellent. Any other comments? I will take the privilege of being chair to say one quick thing, which is just to thank all of you, the 14 of us in the committee, the electeds, the lay people, the new folks particularly, who are probably thinking, why did I get into this? I'm kidding. And also the staff. I mean, all of us on this call, and I don't know how many the total number is, but we probably have a lot of other things we could be doing on a Monday night, from 6 to 8 or 6 to 8:11. Whoops, I'm sorry, I took a minute too long. But I look forward to our robust discussions and working together going forward. And I welcome any other thoughts or comments. I don't know why I accepted being chair again, but no, I'm kidding. I think this is great. And I really think we're all in this together in so many different ways. And hopefully I did a good enough job to, so I won't be laughed off next time. Otherwise, Juan Carlos, you can take over for me. Hey, listen, thank you. I think we can adjourn without a motion, or who am I turning to on this? Andrea, somebody? Alrighty, I think with seeing no other comments here, thank you all. Have a great night. We are adjourned at 8:12.